Microsoft's apparently keen to kick software vendors out of the Windows kernel. Lots of folks are thinking that this has a silver lining for us Linux gaming enthusiasts. I mean, after all, if Easy Anti-Cheat and others have to run in user space, that's gotta be good for us Linux gamers, right? Not so fast. There are a lot of nuances here, and many questions that remain unresolved. So let's dive into this. Will a lockdown of Windows help or hurt Linux gaming? First of all, what's changed and what's the reason we're even talking about this? So you probably remember the CrowdStrike incident from a few weeks ago. I mean, after that, who can blame Microsoft for wanting to lock vendors out of their kernel? And who wouldn't? I mean, why wouldn't they let a good crisis go to waste? Now, CrowdStrike was a man-made disaster. A single vendor whose software served a very specific and, in my opinion, mostly security theater purpose brought down multiple industries for days. And while Microsoft doesn't really shoulder any of the blame here, at least in my opinion, they faced uncomfortable questions about how this could have been allowed to happen in the first place. You see, Microsoft has wanted to close down the kernel since the Vista era. This was back when they were scheming to solidify themselves as the only valid PC operating system. But thanks to the objections from security software vendors and EU regulators, that didn't happen. Back then, we had one of the worst versions of Windows ever released, trying to close itself off because of security concerns, while pushing absurd hardware requirements and pissing everybody off. Today, well, let's just say nothing ever changes. Now, let's just say that I don't think that this will help Linux gaming. If security software loses privileged access that they rely on to do their work from Windows systems, how would they continue to operate? Well, it's pretty clear to me that Microsoft would have to create some kind of API for these solutions, since Redmond would have to satisfy regulators somehow. After all, Microsoft is a competitor with CrowdStrike and with all of the other security software vendors out there. I'm talking like antivirus and the like. And hell, making APIs is basically all Microsoft has ever contributed to the world anyway, so it's not like they're unfamiliar with this territory. Now, if this hypothetical API were to become a thing, it would only be a matter of time before Wine and Proton eventually replicated it. And maybe we'd even be able to run Windows anti-cheat software through Proton, who knows? But you probably wouldn't want to do that. Primarily because if an anti-cheat update comes down the pipeline and things are slightly out of whack with Proton, the anti-cheat could panic and erroneously detect you as cheating, and that would result in a temporary or even a permanent ban for your account. I mean, Bungie was banning Destiny 2 players for playing the game on Steam Deck. Now, you probably just don't want to risk that, right? And this really gets to the heart of the matter. The problem is not that anti-cheat is incompatible with Proton. It's that live service game developers aren't supporting Linux. It's important to realize that we already have the major anti-cheat solutions available for Linux, right? Like we have Easy Anti-Cheat, we have BattlEye, for example. What's more is that they don't need kernel level access to do their job on Linux. And there are many games on the market, Halo Master Chief Collection being one just off the top of my head, that is able to run the game in Proton and use a native version of these anti-cheat solutions. But even though Epic's Easy Anti-Cheat has a Linux client, Fortnite, their flagship game, doesn't have Linux support. It's quite hypocritical, in my opinion. But more than that, it demonstrates the contempt that game developers have for Linux. They don't take Linux seriously despite the heavy investment, the growing market share, and the superior technology to that of Windows. So regardless of all of that, I believe Microsoft closing off the kernel has the potential to do more harm than good, honestly. Why? Well, 3 reasons. The first is that, as I mentioned, Microsoft are competitors with these security software vendors. Microsoft's closing down of their kernel would give them even more control over their competition. It would be a monopolistic move in a major way, and it would potentially solidify their control over the entire Windows environment. Second, for all their cries of security and whatever, Microsoft's track record is incredibly poor. It was revealed just this week that there's been a severe open vulnerability in Windows Update for more than 6 months, and Microsoft has left it unpatched since they learned about it. This vulnerability lets attackers downgrade security patches to versions with known exploits that they would then be able to use to attack the system further. And it's been unpatched for 6 months. And that's not to mention the myriad of other issues with Microsoft's products recently. And the third reason is that Windows is already a terrible product, and having a kernel space that's completely closed off would make it worse. How? Well, Windows has over 70% of desktop operating system market share worldwide. They have no practical competition, and that's what lets them get away with making Windows progressively worse. It's why they can bake ads into their OS. It's why they can push broken updates and force everyone to use Microsoft accounts to access their own computers. Closing the kernel down further blots out competition and makes their complacency even more problematic. And that leads me to my next point. Because if Microsoft actually closes down the Windows kernel, it's not going to help us the way that people seem to expect. That somehow kicking anticheat out of the kernel space will magically make user space solutions for Linux work under Proton. No, that's nonsense, honestly. I mean, again, we've had easy anticheat and BattleEye on Linux for years at this point, and there are tons of developers who just don't support Linux. But here's the thing. In July, Windows 11 lost nearly 1% of its market share on the Steam hardware survey. July also saw an all-time high for Linux desktop usership, according to StatsCounter. Back in the Vista era, Linux wasn't mature enough for your average, everyday, unskilled computer user to install on their machine, let alone run Linux as their daily driver. Today, we not only have robust solutions from multiple Linux vendors that are user-friendly, easy to install, and trivial to maintain, we've also got massive players like Valve entering the OS market and paying open source developers to improve critical software. We also have incredible hardware vendors like System76 creating PCs with fully integrated Linux-powered software, and we have a record number of pre-built computers shipping with Linux pre-installed. Much like we've seen with Blender and with the rise of projects like Godot Engine, I believe Linux dominance is inevitable. Consider that Linux already runs the entire world, minus the desktop. When developers lose access to the Windows kernel, that might just be one more nail in the Windows coffin. So it may not be tomorrow, it may not be the day after, but it is coming. A Microsoft lockdown? Well, dictatorships being inherently unstable, it will only hasten their demise. But I would love to know what you think. Sound off in the comments below. You can also like that smash button. It's the best way to tell YouTube you want to see more videos just like this. With that said, I hope you get subscribed so you can stay up to date with all the fun videos that we're doing here on the channel. And speaking of fun videos, I did a couple here you can check out before you head out. All right, I'll see you.